What's up, guys? In this video, I'm going to talk about the worst brisket mistake I ever made in my life. It happened about 2 months ago, and I almost didn't post this video because I was really embarrassed about it. But I want you guys to learn from my mistakes so you don't screw up a brisket as bad as I did. Now, I was smoking my brisket on the Traeger, and I know a lot of you guys are going to say, well, there's your first mistake, Steve, cooking it on the Traeger. I know you guys are like offset smokers and traditionalists out there, but a lot of us just have Traegers and pellet smokers and electric smokers. I love the offsets, I love the drum smokers, I love all the traditional stuff. You can make a pretty good brisket on a Traeger though. In this case, I did not. It's just an isolated incident. So it all started when a friend of the family asked me to cook a brisket for her. It was actually a neighbor down the street. And I said, hells yes, I'm gonna do that. She paid for my brisket and all I had to do was smoke it. So I went through the process of buying the best brisket I could get, got a super nice brisket. I trimmed the fat cap down to about 1/4 inch thickness, carved out the hard fat on either side, got a nice rub on the outside that I mixed up myself. Now I let that sweat out for about a half an hour. And then I just followed my typical process for smoking a brisket. I fired up the Traeger at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and I just let it ride until about the 6-hour mark when I started looking at it. At that point, I started spritzing it, and then throughout the process, every hour, I was just adding some more moisture by spritzing it, developing that bark. At the 8-hour mark, I took it out of the Traeger. It was around 170 degrees Fahrenheit at this point. The bark wasn't really where I wanted it to be, but that's pretty typical on a pellet smoker. It's kind of hard to get bark unless you go way beyond that 165 mark into like the 180, 190 degrees internal zone. You need a lot of smoke time on a pellet smoker to get a nice bark on these briskets. So then I wrapped it in butcher's paper, and that was not the mistake. I often wrap briskets in butcher's paper and they turn out awesome. I kept on smoking the brisket for another few hours until it got to 205 degrees internal. And this is where I made the unforgivable mistake. Usually, if you guys have been watching my videos for a while, you'll know that I say, oh, you go up to 165 internal, then you wrap your brisket, and then you go up to 205 degrees Fahrenheit, you take it out, you let it rest for 2 hours, bingo, good brisket every time. As I'm learning and advancing in my brisket journey, I'm learning that that is really good advice for your first few briskets. But if you really want to take your brisket game to the next level and prevent having mistakes like I did, then it's a really good idea to not finish your brisket or take it out of the cooker until that sucker probes tender. So this was the unforgivable mistake that I made. I probed into the point and it was tender, and then I probed into the tip of the flat and it was pretty tender, but I didn't probe into the critical area, that holdout zone that's right under the point, right in the middle of the flat. If I had probed there, it would have been super tough, but I just didn't have enough experience at the time to check that one area, and I should have. And if I did, I would have waited probably another 1 to 2 hours and fully rendered that down and got it nice and tender. So this is where putting your brisket in the cooler usually saves a lot of people. They'll take it out and they'll put it in a cooler for like 2 or 3 hours. And while it's in that cooler, it's still holding around 205 to 200, and it's going down very slowly in temperature. It's still cooking in the cooler. And that is when people are finishing their brisket. So what I've learned is that you want to finish your brisket on the cooker. You don't want to finish it in the cooler. So always probe into that one holdout area in the middle of the flat until it is tender, because otherwise, I'll show you a clip of me cutting into this brisket right now. It was soul destroying. Honestly, like someone had paid me to make this brisket for them. I thought I was like the brisket master, and I'm sawing into this thing, and all of a sudden it's like 3 in the morning, I'm cutting into it and it's cutting like shoe leather. And I was beside myself in grief. It was a terrible experience. I had to have a couple beers, to be honest. I had to have a couple of those. So don't repeat that mistake, please. Please probe until the middle of that flat is tender, probes tender like room temperature butter when you insert your probe. Bonus tip, this is another mistake that I made. I cut into the brisket when it was too high in temperature. It was too hot before I started slicing it. I've since learned that it's best to cut your brisket when it's around 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to let the brisket come down in temperature and retain and suck up that moisture. And it's actually a big reason why when people take pictures of their brisket and they'll post it on Facebook groups or on Instagram, and everyone's like, oh, that brisket's so dry. It's not actually that dry. They're just cutting it way too early. They're not resting it long enough until it gets down to like the 140 degrees Fahrenheit zone. If you wait until it comes down in temperature, you don't want to wait too long because that's like the food safety issues zone, right? You don't want to leave it at like 130. You just want to get it down there and then slice it and serve it right away. And it's going to be really moist and delicious. See you in the next video, guys.